Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Balodi, and today we are going to have a part two, actually, of a discussion with Terri Couwenhoven, who works at the Medical College of Wisconsin at the Down Syndrome Center there. And Terri is a world-renowned expert in this topic when it comes to sexuality and dating and things like that, and this population of folks who have a developmental disability, including Down syndrome. And if anyone has ever been to any type of Down syndrome conference, you have likely seen some topic that, or maybe 20, that Terri is going to be doing at that conference because we tend to use her up as much as we can while she's there. So, Terri, thanks so much for joining us again on the podcast.
Oh, happy to be here.
Well, we are going to talk about today a topic that I wonder if there may be people listening to this podcast who have younger children with Down syndrome who are thinking, oh, at least I don't have to worry about them going on dates and whatnot like other teens. And I'm going to ask you just a very simple question. Is that true? Is it true that people with Down syndrome are just happily at home all the time and loving on their parents, even through their teenage years?
No, it's not true. I
Yeah.
can vouch for that.
Yes.
Personal experience. Um, but I think there's a wide range. When I talk about dating and people with Down syndrome, there are some people who are very adamant about wanting to participate in the dating process, right? And usually they're pretty vocal about it. Maybe they've found somebody they really, really like. Um, or they see other people, I mean, sibs, including sibs, right?
Yeah.
Go through the process of dating and they want to do the same thing. There's other people who just aren't interested. Or maybe they just aren't interested yet.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a delay, right? Sometimes they find a person they're really interested in and then they become interested in dating. So parents, when I do dating webinars for parents, they're like, what if my kid isn't interested? Is something wrong with them? And no, there's a wide, everything's normal.
Yeah.
Everything's normal. Sometimes people are attracted to people of the same sex, right? I mean, the sexual orientation, all of that, there's a wide range in the general population, and there's a wide range in people with Down syndrome as well. So
And when you do your
it's all
workshop,
normal.
yes, yes. And when you do your workshops, actually, one of the things I think that might be helpful for folks to understand, give an idea, like when you, let's say you're at a conference or a convention and they asked you to give a workshop. You mentioned something about a parent workshop. So tell me a little more about what that looks like, but also like do you do workshops with the individuals with Down syndrome as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I created the dating workshop for people with intellectual disabilities because uh, a lot of the people that I was working with, again, I'm a sex educator. So outside of my Down syndrome clinic job, I'm doing sex education exclusively for people with intellectual disabilities, their families and professionals who are supporting them. So in working with people with intellectual disabilities, they were interested in dating. They just didn't understand the process. What actually has to happen in order for a dating relationship to develop. So basic things like, well, first you have to find someone, right? And how do you do that? What are some safe ways to meet people? What are some not so safe ways to meet people? Thinking about that. Um, there has to be mutual interest, right? A lot of times people have what I refer to as either, one way they have a crush on someone, but the other person doesn't feel the same. So, kind of how do you assess that? What does a flirting process look like? You have to read signals and that kind of thing. Um, so kind of going through the process with people with intellectual disabilities. But one of the unique things always for or in working with people with intellectual disabilities is they have support people who are helping them in some way. That can be a parent, that can be a professional. And so we know from the literature that when people who are supporting people with intellectual disabilities are getting similar information, it's more effective in, supporting the individual. So after I developed the dating workshop for people with intellectual disabilities, I decided parents also needed a workshop on how to support their sons and daughters. What are some of the unique issues and barriers for people, because sometimes parents are a barrier. They can be a barrier, right?
Yes.
They can sabotage relationships, or they can, one of the unique issues for parents is we have to provide that support. If somebody's going to date, whether it's transportation or chaperoning, or I mean, there's a role that we have to play if they're living at home and we're the ones responsible for all this. So sometimes parents are willing to do that and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where the parent component came in.
Yeah.
They needed support with this too. What am I supposed to do?
Yes. And so for our families, for our listeners who are, interested in being a part of these workshops, or maybe even having your loved one be a part of this as well. Certainly, I know Terry will be at the NDSC convention. I'm sure the National Down Syndrome Congress convention in July of 2024 in Phoenix. But you can also, I think I can put in the show notes. I think you have a website, Terry, that I could probably put in the show notes that would give some dates of what's coming up on your webinars.
Yeah.
That too.
Yeah, I do have a schedule, and I try to put in there if it's in person or
Okay.
virtual.
Yeah.
And then the contact person, because
Perfect.
they're all over the country. But yeah, it's my name
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'll spell it.
Or like we were talking about before the call, you just do your best and then Google will fix it for you. So
Carrie, yeah, it's Couwenhoven, but yeah,
perfect.
so my schedule is on my website.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Now getting back to the topic here again. So with this dating, what would be some signs that perhaps a parent or maybe an individual, even with a disability, might be able to show to indicate that, hey, they're ready for dating, or dating maybe the next step in their growth into an adult?
Oh, that's a great question. Because,
Yeah.
um, I want to just say to parents that all of the work that you've done on really basic social skill stuff
Yeah.
comes into play when we're talking about dating, right? So manners, initiating conversations, keeping a conversation going. I mean, all those really general foundational skills um, can move forward when we're talking about dating. But readiness, I know a lot of parents like to just say, well, when you're 18 or when you're 16 or when you're 15, you can date. And I'm going to say to you that when the person with Down syndrome turns that age, they will take you literally, and there is no negotiation with that. So I always say to parents, it's not really about an age, it's about a skill level. So um what kind of skills do they need? Now, the beauty of dating is you can practice with supervision. We call that chaperoning, right?
Mhm.
And so if you have a newbie, a son or daughter who's new to the dating world, chaperoning allows you to assess skills and by observing and kind of seeing what areas maybe need some work. And people do grow from experiences. They do grow and mature as they practice these skills. So I'm just gonna say that. They
Okay.
may look immature now, but with experiences, they do grow and mature and get better at this stuff. Just like we did, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. My wife might say that I haven't yet grown in my skills of dating, but so but that's a whole different. We'll do that offline, Terry. You can help me with that part. Okay. So when we're thinking about specifically our friends with Down syndrome who are going on these early dates, let's say this young teenager says, "Hey, I'm ready to go and date this person." What type of preparation do you think might be same as it would be for anyone else, and what might be a little bit more that might need to be focused on, perhaps for someone with Down syndrome going out on an early date?
Well, in my parent book, I have and I do share it in the dating workshops. I have a kind of a planning a date cheat sheet.
Ah,
So, and they can look at it, right? It's visual. What are some of the things that you need to think about when you're planning a date? Where are we going to go? What time? What date? Um, how are we gonna get there? So yeah, there's some just basic things to think about. I think the Adult Down Syndrome Center also has kind of a planning a date worksheet. It's a little bit different. And they do have some dating information in addition to my book. So that's another resource. But yeah, you know, uh, you have to teach everything,
Mm.
right? You have to be thinking about, we take a lot of things, we just assume our kids understand the process, but they don't necessarily, especially if they're newbies. So just kind of sitting down and doing the plan. And then they get better at it as they get more experienced.
And
So
as I've, obviously my brother, as I watched him go through the teenage, young adult years, and then of course in my clinic practice, seeing a lot of folks go through that, I see how so many of my friends with Down syndrome at that age tend to almost kind of live in an imaginary kind of world where, they have a crush on some movie star or TV star, and that person is obviously back reciprocating that love to them even though they've never met, right? Or maybe even generalizing, I saw this on TV or saw this in a movie, so therefore this is what I should do when I go out on a date, and maybe it's a very inappropriate thing to do. So how do you specifically, as you're giving advice to parents, how do you approach those types of issues?
um with parents,
Yeah, with parents or even
I
with
actually, I
yeah.
just approach it directly with people
Okay.
with intellectual
Okay.
disabilities. One of the things I start out in my dating workshop saying is, now, this workshop is about real life. Real life. I know you guys have seen stuff, but we're going to talk about real life. So, I actually have a slide with a picture of somebody thinking about Harry Styles, and so the difference between imaginary, yes, you have a crush on Harry Styles, but that's going to be one way. That's a one way attraction. And then, a real couple in real life. So kind of helping them understand the difference. When my daughter was younger, the piece of information that really clicked for her was when they were learning about fiction and nonfiction books.
Ah.
And so we were able to kind of, if she was talking about an imaginary world, I could say, is this fiction or nonfiction? And
Mhm.
then she would say, oh, this is fiction,
Yeah. Yeah.
real world or imaginary world. I mean, you can put your own words to that, but yeah, I guess somebody who is wanting to date Harry Styles is not going to have any success with that, right? He's kind of a busy guy, and yeah, there's no chance in hell they're going to be going on a date with Harry Styles.
No, but and even beyond that, when we're thinking about just even from a safety perspective, I mean, I know we're having fun on the podcast today, but there is this concern that, because of what seems to be in so many people with Down syndrome, just this inherent trustfulness. They seem to trust others and what they say as being true, and so therefore can be victims sometimes of abuse, and sexual abuse being among those things. How do you recommend for that person with intellectual disability, but also even with their parents, to effectively discuss things like boundaries, expectations on the date, those types of things?
Well, ideally, these conversations should have happened a long time
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and I'm just going to say that these conversations can start with young children. And you and I have experienced this, Kishore, in the clinic. The innate body protectiveness that can happen with a patient as a baby, right? You go towards the baby and they just sort of move backwards, right? So there's this inherent built-in, um, I think, respect for boundaries, but we sometimes force people to um remove that. It goes away as we force people to be compliant. We force them to do things they don't want to do, and that's especially true in the population of people with intellectual disabilities. So the boundary messages, related to adults should be, your body's your own. You get to decide um, what you want to do with your body. There's rules about respecting other people's boundaries. So we do talk a little bit about that. Um, in the workshop. Now, in my book, I purposefully put in a page that has, these are some things that people do when they first go on a date. And, there's pictures of people kissing and holding hands and side hugs and snuggling. And which ones do you feel comfortable doing? I mean, it's sort of an assessment of um what are your boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Because this is dating is a unique kind of relationship, and we share touch and affection. That's one of the special things about dating. And so, a lot of the people that I work with are, they've gotten in trouble maybe historically from violating boundaries, maybe being huggers and, parents realizing that's not looking okay now that they're an adult. So I want them to know that in a dating relationship, sharing affection is a part of that.
Yeah.
So figuring out what you feel okay with um, takes some practice.
Yeah. And I think, you hit on some really important points there. And even for, there are people who listen to the podcast who are parents, but there are also people who listen who are clinicians. And one of the things that I always try to do and teach to our trainees is even when kids are young in the
Mhm.
clinic, if they're 5 or 6 years old, I'll say, okay, now we have to examine your body at this point, but it's only safe for someone to do that if mom or dad is here with us and says it's safe. And there are times where the mom or dad will say, because he's a doctor, it's safe. And I'll say, no, no,
Yep.
no, because I'm a doctor and you are here with your child saying
Yeah.
it's safe. And then as they get older and understand that those boundaries are important to keep and they can keep them themselves, then it becomes a little bit easier to say, I'm going to examine you now. Do you feel safe with that? And then respecting what areas do they feel safe or don't feel safe as they get older and able to make those types of decisions. I don't know. Would you agree? I mean, I think setting that up at an early age is so important.
Yeah, yeah, and it's about context.
Yeah.
It's about, why are you touching them? And in your role as a physician, it's healthcare, right? I mean, your job as a doctor, you get paid to make sure their whole body's healthy, including their private body parts. But the rules for the private body boundaries for private parts are very specific. So health reasons, right? That might be a reason somebody, and I agree with you. I still think we ask, are you
Hmm.
ready for me to do an exam? Or are you comfortable with me doing an exam? And I don't know how you handle it when they say no,
Yeah.
but some people will say, okay, the first time there's a no, but then let's work towards making sure that we can assess whether or not they're healthy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um health and hygiene stuff, as people are growing up and, let's say, moving through puberty. I think that becomes a time when we're really focused on helping people to be independent with self-care. And so if they need help, who's their hygiene helper, right? And then the third only other situation would be in a consensual touch in a dating relationship. So what does consent mean? I mean, asking permission. And I talk a lot about, two yeses. There has to be two yeses. It's not just about you, it's about the other
Yeah.
person and how they feel as well.
Hmm.
And that's true for all of us.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just have to break it down uh,
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Now, I have had some parents say, I don't necessarily want my young person with Down syndrome to be dating because if they start dating, the next thing you know, they're going to be in a serious relationship and then want to, get married. And these are things that they can't do. How would you respond to someone who may think those things or say those things about their young
Yeah,
person?
I think you're right. I think there is a fear that, okay, if I let this happen,
Yeah.
it's going to lead to this.
Hmm.
And in my experience, most of the time, it's a rare thing, I think, for people to move into that really serious spot of marriage or commitment ceremony. Um, I think most people are looking for a meaningful connection, just like you or I would be doing. And sometimes that happens, and different people want different things in a relationship. Sometimes it's just, my daughter, when she was dating, she was happy seeing the person once every 3 months. I mean, it wasn't, you know, uh not it wasn't like I would think of a dating relationship, but she's a busy girl, so that's all she had time for. So different people want different things. I will say that when two people do click,
Mhm,
when it's a good connection, to really celebrate that, because it doesn't happen that often.
mhm.
I mean, more and more we're seeing people get married, but still it's a small minority of people who find the right match.
Yeah.
Um, so I think fearing that long-term connection it doesn't happen very often, I guess that's what I'm gonna say. I don't see it happening very often.
And I think like there are many times where I think as a parent to children who do not have Down syndrome, I have these fears sometimes. Oh, if they start dating, then they might get serious. And so I sometimes think it's hard maybe for some parents to know that every parent kind of goes through that with their young person, that's their child, and that fear and anxiety that goes into it. But I think, as you said, that the quest for some sort of companionship, I think, is something that should be universal to humanity,
Mhm.
that people don't want to necessarily, not everyone, but people usually don't want to be alone. They like to have that kind of companionship through friendship or dating relationships. And so for that to be withheld from somebody because of our own fears, I don't know, I think that would just be, it would be a sad thing. What do you think?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we're all sexual human beings, and
Uh-huh.
so we all have needs and desires, and
Yeah.
so figuring out how to meet those needs as a parent is a
Yeah.
little tricky, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Wow. Okay, Terry, this was a great podcast, as one would expect. Talking about topics that can sometimes, as a parent, make you feel uncomfortable to have to do, whether your child has an intellectual disability or not. As you recall, probably about a decade ago or so, we had you come out to Pittsburgh, and you said, "Well, have you had the talks with your kids yet?" And I said, "What? What do you mean? They're not even 10 yet. They're barely 10 or whatever. I forget what it was." And you were like, "You have to have the talks." I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay." And then I did, and it was great. So I think the same thing would be said here on this podcast is you have to prepare your kids for what's ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Oh, I'm not sure I said talk, because one of the things
You
I
didn't
say
say
to
talk,
parent
no.
families
Yeah,
is the one-time talk isn't really effective.
right.
It's ongoing conversations that
Yeah.
happen over time. So maybe I said, have you initiated the conversation?
Okay. I think either that or you pluralized talk. I don't know. But either way, it worked. And we have continued conversations since then, which has been wonderful. So I think these
Good.
are really important things to remember for all of us as parents to do.
Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
I think, parents often think they have control over when their son or daughter gets information about sexuality, and that's not the case. I mean,
True.
they're exposed to stuff on a daily basis. So parents really have to be thinking, who do I want them to learn from, right? Um, because they pick up information, they don't always understand the nuances of what they've seen, and so it can be a little bit disconcerting as far as messages they pull out
Yeah.
from seeing movies or whatever. So being a sounding board as a parent and processing that with them becomes a part of our job.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast, Terry. And in terms of resources that I can share within the show notes, of course, I'll share the books that you have written, links to those books. Any other resources? You mentioned the Adult Down Syndrome Center in Chicago having some resources, so I will do that as well. Any other resources you think I should include?
Well, if you have a son or daughter who's thinking about dating or is in the process of dating, the National Center for Independent Living has a series called Sex Ed for IDD, and if you just Google that, they're on YouTube, but they're really nice short little snippets by people with intellectual disabilities for people with
Oh, that's
intellectual
wonderful.
disabilities. Yeah,
Okay.
so they have one on healthy relationships and consent and birth control and pregnancy and how somebody gets pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're nicely done, and I use them all the time in my workshops.
Great. I will include those as well. Thank you.
Okay. Do you
Uh,
want me to send you the link? I can send you the link.
that would be wonderful too. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Um, And to our listeners, thank you so much for always listening and providing us with some great ideas for future podcasts. I've gotten a couple recently that we're going to be recording here shortly, but please don't stop sending those emails, Down Syndrome Center at chp.edu. We do read each and every one of those emails, and it is very helpful for us to know what topics you would like us to address or perhaps readdress if we haven't addressed it in a while. And also, if you'd like to join us in the work that we do here at the center, including this podcast, please go to givetochildrens.org/Down Syndrome Center. But until next time, bye-bye.